what happened and why our baby didn't come home.
And this morning, we're focusing on the desperate search for answers in the mysterious death of 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells. He didn't return with friends after a 4th of July boat trip to a Mississippi island. Wells' mother reported him missing that very night, but tragically, a few days later, his body was found. Now, there are a lot of questions about what happened to him, and his family is demanding answers. Nolan's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley, and their attorney, Ben Crump, are joining us now in studio to talk more about this. Thank you both and Attorney Crump for being here under these especially difficult circumstances that no parent ever wants to live through. Christine and Elmore, can you help us understand what your understanding is of the timeline and what questions you both still have about what actually happened to Nolan?
So he basically, the night before, all the boys got together, stayed the night. 4th of July, they launched the boat. They went to the island, and that was that. I was expecting hey, we're back, like he normally does. Didn't happen. Get a phone call around 11, 4th of July. Hey, have you talked to Nolan? And I'm like, no, where is he at? So then my friend Tashima was so helpful in tracking his phone down because everyone was looking at the Snapchat location because all the kids follow each other. But I was looking at Life 360 and I'm like, well, I don't understand because I'm literally looking at his phone like it's at someone's house. So thankfully my friend did go grab the phone for us. As we were kind of doing the other part of it, which was notifying, the local authorities, trying to figure out who we needed to speak to do the missing persons report, because I know that needs to be done as soon as possible, especially when we're talking about water. We wanted to make sure that we could try to find him, and that was the goal.
Who called you first initially, and how well do you know the people that Nolan was hanging out with that day? How familiar are you with them and their families?
So their families, we have not met. So Warren was the one who made the phone call, and he did contact the Coast Guard as well, which I know there's some discrepancies now with that. But he did contact them, and I was going back and forth with the Sheriff's Department and the City of Ocean Springs. Who do we talk to? So then it turned into I had to contact DMR. And DMR took the information, but then reverted me back to Ocean Springs Police Department. So it's kind of like, where do we go from here? So Jackson County basically was like, hey, we're gonna take it over. We'll go ahead and do the report.
Well, the mother of one of the boys who was with Nolan apparently posted on social media that Nolan made a decision to stay on the island and then return inland later with another group of friends. Were you made aware of that plan beforehand? Is that something that Nolan would have done or would do often?
No.
No, he wouldn't. Nolan was always taught to stay with the group. If you leave with me, you come back with me. So that I don't understand. And with me being a parent, if I was in that situation, I would have told him, you're going to get back on this boat with me because I don't want to have to answer to your parents if something happened to you.
Right.
So you're going to get on the boat. And if you still don't want to get on the boat, someone give me a phone so I can make a phone call to get your parents on the phone so they can tell you to get on the boat. But at no time will I leave someone else's child especially on the island.
So you think he got left behind then?
Yes. I don't believe he decided to stay on the island by himself. It just doesn't, that's not his character.
Somewhere in the space of about 12 hours, a phone that never stopped buzzing turned into a phone with nothing on it at all. Not a photo, not a video, not one saved message from an 18-year-old who, by his own mother's account, checked in constantly, a selfie, a peace sign, a quick smile just to say he was fine. That gap between the phone Nolan Wells actually carried that day and the phone that eventually reached his mother's hands is where this story actually starts. For the first time since their son's body was recovered, Nolan Wells' parents sat down and told their side of it. Not through a press release, not through a statement read by somebody else. Christine and Elmore Wansley, sitting beside their attorney, Ben Crump, said plainly that they do not accept the explanation they were given. Not the timeline, not the reason offered for why their son was left behind, not the state that phone was in when it finally came back to them. Most coverage of this case has repeated the timeline once and moved on. Today we're going to walk through it the way the family actually experienced it, hour by hour, because when you lay it out in order instead of in fragments, the picture changes. 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells went missing after a 4th of July boat trip to Horn Island, off the Mississippi coast. His body was found days later in the water near the same stretch of beach where he was last seen. Nolan was a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College, with a Division I tryout reportedly scheduled for the Monday after that holiday weekend. According to his mother, this trip wasn't unusual. This same group of friends had made the exact same trip before without incident. There was no reason, walking into that day, to expect anything other than an ordinary ending. Nolan comes home. Everybody moves on with their weekend. That is not what happened. Christine said she wasn't initially worried when evening came and went without a word from her son. He'd stayed out late before, watching movies, at a party with friends. That, on its own, meant nothing. What changed everything was a phone call at 11:07 that night. Not from Nolan, but from one of the boys on the boat, a young man named Warren. She said the second she saw it was one of Nolan's friends calling her directly, her heart dropped. His friends simply don't call her like that. Now, let me walk you through what happened after that call, because the family has laid this out in enough detail that you can actually follow it step by step. Within minutes of hanging up with Warren, Christine called a family friend, Tashima, whose sons had grown up alongside Nolan, to check with the boys directly. At roughly the same time, the group of boys started pulling up Nolan's location through Snapchat, since they all followed each other there. Christine, working a separate track entirely, was checking Life 360, a location tracking app the family used. And between those two apps, something didn't line up. Nolan's phone was showing up in one location. His car was showing up somewhere else entirely. From there, the family turned to notifying authorities, and this is where the night stopped moving forward and started moving sideways. They called the sheriff's department. They were redirected to the city of Ocean Springs. The Department of Marine Resources took her information and redirected her back to Ocean Springs Police. Eventually, and only eventually, Jackson County stepped in and took over the case entirely. That is not a small detail. That is precious time, in the earliest and most reversible hours of a missing persons case, spent identifying who has jurisdiction instead of anyone actively searching. By the time Jackson County formally took over, hours had already passed since that first call at 11:07. And the phone itself, the one piece of physical evidence that could have answered most of the family's questions immediately, didn't reach Christine that night at all. Tashima told her not to worry about retrieving it herself, that she'd go get it. It took a while, by Christine's account, before that phone actually made it into her friend's hands. And even after that, Christine and Tashima had to coordinate separately just to hand it off. Let me stop right there, because that detail matters more than it sounds like it does. A cell phone belonging to a missing 18-year-old spent an unknown, undocumented number of hours in the hands of people who were not law enforcement, was not immediately preserved, and was not treated, at that stage, as evidence at all. Whatever happened to that phone in that window happened with no chain of custody, no documentation, and no oversight. And that is precisely the window the family says something was deleted. Here is where the story the family was told stops adding up, in their words. According to what Christine was told, Nolan made the decision, on his own, to stay behind on the island and catch a ride back later with a different group of friends. Her answer to that was immediate. No. She said Nolan was raised on one rule, drilled into him for years. If you leave with the group, you come back with the group. She said if she had been there, she would have told him to get back on the boat, full stop, and if he pushed back, she would have handed him a phone right there to call his own parents. In her words, at no time would she have left someone else's child behind, especially on an island. Elmore's account matched hers almost word for word, but he came at it from years of direct conversations with his son. He described Nolan as a silent leader, the kind of person other kids naturally followed, not because of what he said, but because of how he carried himself. He said he had told Nolan the same thing for years. Stay with your group, no matter what. Don't split off chasing after a girl. There are girls everywhere. She's not the only one. His closing line on the subject was direct. He does not believe his son volunteered to stay on that island. He said he just cannot believe that. Now, here's a detail that adds an entire second layer to this. Christine said the first explanation she received was that Nolan wanted to stay behind with a girl. In that same initial conversation, she was also told that the girl herself was missing, and that nobody in the group actually knew who she was. Sit with that for a second. The explanation for why Nolan stayed behind depended entirely on a specific person, and in the very first version of events the family received, that same person was described as unaccounted for. Crump has pointed to a contradiction that sits directly on top of that one. He says the young woman Nolan was speaking with has said Nolan told her he was heading back to the boat to rejoin his friends. The friends on the boat have said the opposite, that Nolan told them he wanted to stay behind with her. Two accounts, directly opposed. Crump's response was blunt. Which is it? Somebody isn't telling the truth. There is also a video circulating widely online, reportedly showing an argument on or near the island that day. Crump has described what he says the audio captures, a voice he believes is Nolan's, protesting something close to, "Where's my freaking phone? What are you freaking doing?" It's worth being precise here, because Crump himself has not been fully consistent on this point. In one interview, pressed directly on whether that voice has been confirmed as Nolan's, he pulled back, saying only that there were kids talking and clearly some kind of argument. In a separate interview, alongside Christine and Elmore, he described that same audio with more certainty, as confirmed to be Nolan protesting that his friends had his phone. Whichever version is more accurate, the detail underneath it hasn't moved either way. There was, by all accounts, some kind of argument that day involving Nolan, and it appears to be connected to his phone. And that raises the question nobody has answered publicly. If there is a recorded argument over that phone, and Nolan turns up dead in the water days later, why has the sheriff's office continued to say there's no evidence of foul play? Now, let me talk about the phone itself, because this is the piece of evidence the family keeps returning to, and once you understand how phones like this actually work, you'll understand why. Once Christine and her sister got access to Nolan's phone, they went through it themselves. Nothing. No saved photos. No saved videos. Nothing at all from that day. She said Nolan was constantly active on Snapchat, always sending her selfies, a peace sign, a smile, just to check in. A phone like that, belonging to a kid like that, coming back completely empty wasn't just unusual to her. It read as impossible. Here's why the timing matters. Snapchat content of that kind is built to disappear automatically, typically within 24 hours, if nobody saves it first. Christine and her sister started searching Nolan's phone before that 24-hour window had closed. That detail cuts directly against the innocent explanation. If the platform itself hadn't had time to auto-delete anything yet, then whatever wasn't there had to have been removed by someone, manually, before that window closed. Not by Snapchat's own systems. By a person. Crump says the family now believes both Snapchat messages and standard text messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before it was ever returned to them. And that raises the next question. Can deleted data like that actually come back? According to one legal analyst who's covered this case, the answer is often yes. He said publicly that he has personally helped build a murder case around nothing but deleted text messages pulled off a phone. Deleting something doesn't erase it, in most cases. It hides it, at different levels within the device, levels a proper forensic examination can frequently still reach. And there's a second layer underneath that. Text messages typically pass through a carrier's network on their way from one phone to another, which means even a successfully deleted message on the device itself isn't necessarily gone from every record tied to it. Investigators, or Crump's own team, may still be able to request those records directly from the carrier or from Snapchat, entirely separate from whatever does or doesn't remain on the phone. Christine has said the family is now working with experts specifically trying to recover both. Let me be very clear about why this detail carries the weight it does for this family. This isn't a case of a teenager who occasionally forgot to save a video. Christine described her son's relationship with his phone almost as a running joke between them, his hand practically attached to it, always messaging her, always documenting whatever he was doing. For a phone like that to come back with nothing on it from an entire day at the beach with friends isn't a gap. To his own mother, it read as evidence that something had been deliberately removed. There's one more piece of physical evidence, smaller than the others, but it matters because it doesn't rely on anyone's memory of a conversation. It's a photograph. After Christine posted publicly asking for information, a young woman who'd been on the island that day reached out. She told Christine that the official report described Nolan wearing black shorts. Her own photos from that day, taken while Nolan was there, show him in blue shorts. She sent those photos to Christine directly. Let me stop right there, because black and blue aren't colors you mistake, not in person, not in a photograph. not under any lighting. This isn't somebody misremembering a stressful night 3 weeks later. It's a documented, time-stamped photograph, apparently contradicting an official report on a fact that shouldn't be up for interpretation at all. Step back now and look at what's actually accumulated. A phone call that didn't add up. 2 agencies pointing the family in different directions before a third finally took the case. 2 directly conflicting accounts of Nolan's final conversation on that beach. A recorded argument, reportedly over that same phone. A phone returned with nothing on it, deleted inside a window with no chain of custody. A documented photograph contradicting the official report. Every single one of those, taken alone, has an explanation that costs nothing to believe. Taken together, they are much harder to believe individually, because believing each one in isolation means ignoring the one that came right before it. Now, let me talk about the layer of this story that has almost nothing to do with the physical evidence and everything to do with how this case has been discussed publicly. Some of the public reaction to this case has focused, in ugly ways, on the fact that Nolan was traveling with a friend group that was mostly white and questioned why he was in that group to begin with. Christine's response to that was direct, and it's worth including in full. She said she and her husband would never tell any of their children they weren't allowed to associate with somebody because of the color of their skin. She said Nolan's heart was big enough to be a friend to everybody, and that the outpouring of support they've received, including from Nolan's own friends, is a testament to how they raised him. If anyone has a problem with that, she said, that's a problem on their end, not hers. It's worth including because it shows exactly what this family is and isn't focused on. They are not interested in relitigating who Nolan's friends were. Their focus, consistently, across every interview, has been on what actually happened during those missing hours. Crump, for his part, has placed the family's demand for an independent investigation inside a specific historical context, invoking the killing of Emmett Till in the same state, as part of explaining the family's concern about how a case involving a young black man and a group of white friends might be handled by local authorities. Now, let me bring in the legal analysts, because after these interviews aired, a panel of people who do this professionally raised a series of sharp, specific questions that the emotional weight of the interviews alone doesn't capture. The first question is about evidence preservation. One analyst noted plainly that the boys called Nolan's mother at 11 at night, but the phone itself wasn't handed over until sometime the following day. In any investigation, she said, that exact gap is when evidence gets lost or altered. She raised questions nobody has answered publicly. Did anyone document whether the friends had changed clothes? Were there scratches or signs of a physical altercation on anyone's body? Were those questions even asked in the early interviews? The second question is about the legal weight of that phone. If there's a recorded argument involving Nolan and his phone, and his friends left the island with that phone while he did not return with them, one analyst has pointed out that arguably constitutes theft. And in a missing persons case involving a possible drowning, law enforcement routinely has tools available, exigent circumstances warrants that can compel phone carriers or apps like Snapchat to hand over data quickly. He questioned why none of that appears to have happened here in the first several days. The third question is chain of custody, directly. If the phone sat in the friend group's possession for hours before it reached the family, and anything was deleted from it during that window, that alone, regardless of what the content turns out to show, could support an argument of evidence tampering. There has also been direct criticism of the sheriff's office for stating publicly, this early, that there's no evidence of foul play. The analyst's point was consistent. An active, ongoing investigation this early should be described as exactly that, active and ongoing, not effectively closed before basic questions have been answered. One analyst raised a separate point about Judge Ashley Cole, whose son Warren was one of the boys on the boat. Judge Cole had previously posted her own detailed public statement defending her son and laying out her family's account of the timeline. The analyst's read on that statement was blunt, that the judge was getting ahead of the story, building her own record early, before harder questions could be asked. She wasn't accusing the judge of anything specific. She said the timing and the framing of that statement were both worth noting on their own. Taken together, the panel's message was consistent. The delayed handoff of the phone, the deleted messages, the lack of an early forensic warrant, the sheriff's early public statements. Every piece of it, they said, is exactly the kind of evidence that tends to matter far more later, in a courtroom, than it seems to matter right now. in the middle of an active investigation. Here's what all of this actually points to. Should a missing persons case involving multiple jurisdictions have a single point of contact from the first call, instead of a family being bounced between agencies while the clock runs? Should a phone recovered from a friend group in an active investigation be treated automatically as evidence requiring immediate documented chain of custody, rather than something handed over voluntarily, whenever it's convenient, a day later? Those aren't abstract questions. They're the specific gaps this case has exposed, and they're gaps that could be closed before the next family goes through this. This case has pulled in significant outside support. Colin Kaepernick helped fund an independent autopsy. Tyler Perry is covering the family's funeral expenses. Reverend Al Sharpton has appeared publicly alongside the family and their attorney. So here's where things actually stand right now. The state medical examiner has completed an autopsy. A full cause of death, including toxicology, could still take time. Investigators have told reporters they suspect Nolan drowned. That has not been confirmed as an official finding. An independent autopsy, conducted separately, is expected to produce results in a similarly short window. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter continues to say publicly that his office hasn't found evidence of a crime, while acknowledging, in his own words, that people want answers faster than a real investigation can move. Crump has raised the question of whether the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation should take the case over entirely, rather than leaving it with the local sheriff's office. What we're left with is a mother and father who do not accept the story they were first told. A phone that came back with something missing from it, deleted inside a window nobody was watching. A photograph that contradicts the official report. A video that may or may not confirm a voice, capturing what sounds like an argument over that same phone. 2 accounts of Nolan's last conversation on that beach that cannot both be true. And a sheriff's office that has called this settled before answering any of it. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. A football player. A young man his father called a silent leader, the kind other kids followed without being told to. A son his mother says would never have chosen to stay behind, alone, without a word about when he was coming home. His parents aren't asking anyone to accept a theory. They're asking for a real investigation, and they're asking publicly because they say they haven't gotten straight answers any other way. This case is not closed. When the independent autopsy results come in, when those deleted messages are recovered or confirmed lost for good, when this investigation moves in whatever direction it moves, we will be here to cover it. If this is the kind of reporting you want, sourced, verified, nothing added for shock value, subscribe. Nolan Wells deserved every year that was taken from him. That full accounting is still being written. We will be here when it is.